Hey Tom, I just refreshed the recording so
Thank you.
that we got the new section.
Thank you. Okay, so we're talking about how do researchers come up with ideas, right? And it's something that's not talked about a lot, right? So people tell you that you should be looking for gaps in the literature, right? That sounds sort of very mechanical, right? Doesn't sound like a lot of fun. They tell you should be advancing the field, especially if you're very promising. We want you to be the next best thing to advance the field. So should you be developing, focused on developing new ideas, or should you be focusing on, developing existing ideas or coming up with new ideas? So they're the big questions. Well, firstly, Einstein, he was asked whether he kept the notebook to write down all of these ideas. And he said, well, I don't understand the question because it's so seldom that he has an idea, right? So ideas are very precious and rare, right? Real ideas are very precious and rare. So then there's a very interesting story about Richard Feynman. And Richard Feynman graduated as a PhD student, and he was considered to be a prodigy, like a genius. He was immediately conscripted into the Manhattan Project, which is where they developed the atomic bomb, right? And everyone thought there that he was a great intellect. He then, after the war, got a job at Cornell University. And he was supposed to be moving the field of physics onto the next big thing. And he was thinking about what could be the next big thing, what could be the next big, and only focusing on that. But he wasn't getting anywhere. Nothing was coming. And in fact, the only, enjoyment he got was teaching the very smart students at Cornell because they'd ask very challenging and interesting questions. And, his dean was starting to think, we recruited this guy who's supposed to be the next great, the next Einstein, but it's not working out. And even he was struggling, right? So, because he wasn't coming up with any ideas. So one day he was at lunch in the Cornell, cafeteria, and a student started, twirling a plate on his finger. And, Feynman looked at this, and in the plate in the middle, there was the Cornell logo. But that was spinning seemingly at a different rate than the outside of the plane, of the plate. So Feynman got very excited by that and started writing things down and drawing diagrams and equations. And he went to show it to his dean. And his dean must have looked at him and thought, what the hell? Guy's been here for years and hasn't produced anything. And now he's up really excited about a spinning plate. So see what he wrote about it here. In the bottom, the diagrams and the whole business with the spinning plates is what I got the Nobel Prize for. Right? So he just worked on that because he was interested in it, right? And of course, why was he interested in? It's not like he lives in a vacuum. He would have been aware of the literature. Remember, he was a prodigy. He knew all the literature. And he obviously was interested in that for a reason, right? It must have resonated back in the background that he had, right? So he was out there trying to advance the field, but it wasn't happening. But then he saw something that he got very interested in, and that led to his Nobel Prize and the big leap forward in physics. Very interesting fellow. There's a book he wrote, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, which talks all about him. He was a very, very funny man. But you get a unique look into how people come up with ideas, right? And it's not what you expect. It's not, sitting down looking for a gap in the literature. It's working on something you really like. But it's probably going to be a gap in the literature in advance because you're aware of what's gone before you. So, this stuff you enjoy, follow your natural curiosity, yeah? And, I don't even think about where am I going to get this published. I honestly don't think about it, right? I just try to do the best work I can and get it published in the best journal for that sort of work, yeah? So you work on things you love, then that means it's fun to get up and go to work. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're the first one working in this area or the 1,000. Think of the Hyder Lindqvist, right? They must have had fun collecting all those state taxes, thinking no one's done this before. It's a lot of work going through all these yearbooks for each state, but no one's done this before. We might really find something, or we might not, right? So they didn't know whether they'd get it published or not, but they, went through all that work of collecting data and they found something. Here's the big thing, and I'm really serious about that. Be prepared to make a fool of yourself. There's no good being shy, and a lot of people here overcome their shyness and spoke up well today, right? But I try things, but I make a fool of myself all the time, right? I'm really good at it. I'm quite practiced at it. And people don't laugh at you. People feel for you. Oh, well, at least you have a go. You had a crack, right? So be prepared. Unless you're making a fool of yourself, unless you're making mistakes, you're not really trying, So we know the real academics know that you've got to fail lots of times before you succeed, right? So you're not really making a fool of yourself. You were trying and it didn't work. And that's a lot better than people who aren't trying and it doesn't work. So a research culture is really important, right? There's a lot involved in doing research, coming up with the data, doing the interviews, doing the survey, writing the paper, polishing workshop. People don't understand. They write the paper, but they're only 10% there. The other 90% is really polishing this paper and workshopping the paper, right? That's a lot of work involved. If you just do the research and write the paper and send it off to a journal, you're not going to get published. You've got to polish, right? And that involves giving to your colleagues to read, giving a brown bag if you can't get in the seminar series, going to conferences, getting input. So finally, when you've polished it, you've got to target the journals. And if you're lucky enough to get a revise and resubmit, got to know how to respond to the referees, right? And you also need help with getting grants. Lots of deans want their academics to have attracted grants. You need help with networking. So the idea is if you went to a conference with Duke or with me, I'd introduce you around to all the top people that are at the conference, right? And you need help supervising and helping other people. So if we can create a sharing, caring, supportive environment, right, that's really the optimum, right? When you go there, you're talking about your research and everyone wants to help you, but they don't want to be on your paper. They don't want anything for it, right? Because you've got to help them with their paper, their ideas. So it's something you've got to think about all the time. As I drive to work, I think about, well, how can I make myself, more available? I don't want people to be scared to have my door open and everything, but I don't want people to be shy and not come in, right? So how can I assure them that I don't want anything? I don't want to be on their paper. I don't want to steal their PhD shit. So you really got to think about it. And, if you're really generous and unselfish, that helps. But that comes back to you too. So it doesn't matter whether you're, the PhD student or the chaired professor, right? Everyone can make a difference, right? Some of the, Duke is a towering giant, right, in academia, but she's a lecturer at RMIT, right? A lot of you have got higher titles than her, but she wants to make a difference, to make a caring, sharing, supportive environment, right? So she's like a champion. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be the chaired professor that does it. So on my computer screen, there's a sign that says it's the Research Stupid. So not only my own research, but helping everyone else with their research. So you need to be working on it all the time. So things as simple as, taking the time to read your colleagues' papers and giving them comments. If there's a workshop on in your university, read the paper before the seminar and have some, comments prepared for them. And, it's great to talk to others about what you did in the weekend, but it's also good to talk about your research, right? And make that up, something you do regularly. And of course, celebrate successes. Oh, wow, you got a new publication. That's fantastic. So review process, responding to referees. Well, when you decide on a journal, you've got to submit the paper. Well, it's best to conform to the style requirements. So my journal has a funny way of doing the abstract, right? You've got to do the abstract under headings. It's an emerald journal. It's the Journal of Accounting Literature. Others just like a paragraph for the abstract, but mine's got a specific way of doing the abstract. So if I see a paper, submit it to my journal, and the first thing I look at is the abstract, and it's not in the form of the journal, I go, what the hell? You know, they're not showing me any respect, not respecting the process, right? So it's normally a double-blind process. You know, you don't know who the referee is, and the referee doesn't know who you are. However, if you've sufficiently polished your paper, you've probably gone around a few conferences and presented it. So if the referee wanted to find out who the authors were, they could just Google the title, and it might come up at the conference site that so and so presented the paper. Yeah, so in that case, it's only a single blind. Right? So the referee might know, but you take it from me, you never know who the referee is, right? You might think you know who the referee is, but in the cases where I know the referee and people are guessing, they're always wrong, and tragically wrong. Okay, so the language is very severe, right? For example, here's a referee report I got. Your paper stinks, you stink, your university stinks, and your family stinks. That was the referee report. So be prepared to be told that you stink, your work stinks, your university stinks, and your family stinks. Terrible language. But remember, in other professions, the language is tough too. For example, in the theatre, when you're about to go on and do your part, your colleagues, the fellow actors, say, break a leg, right? That's terrible. They're wishing that you break a leg. That's because there's a thought that if they say good luck, that you'll have a very bad performance, right? So they say break a leg. That's what they mean. Anyway, the language is severe, right? So you just got to steel yourself for that. Okay, so then you go and send it for a first round review, right? And the results you can get: accept, revise, or reject, right? When I say accept is a very low probability, let me give you an example. Of 2,500 papers submitted to the Journal of Finance in a regular year, have a guess how many get accepted on the first round? 0. And about 300 make it to the second round. Yeah. Of those in the second round, have a guess how many of those get accepted. They've done a revise and resubmit and sent it in. So now it's the second round. Have a guess how many get number out of 1 to 2,500. 1. 1. Right. And it's only when you get to the third and fourth round that the papers start being accepted. Yeah. So that it's extreme as that. So when I say that accept is a very low probability, that sort of means 0 on the first round, yeah, and just about 0 on the second round at these very top journals, the FD 50. Better, you're hardly ever going to get something accepted on the first round. So don't expect that. If you get a revise and resubmit, but you look at it and it's really, scathing of your paper, the comments are really terrible, insulting, you would think, oh, I'm just going to hide this and not going to show it to anyone. But if you showed it to me, I'd say, fantastic, fantastic. They love your paper. They just want you to fix these few things, right? So a revise and resubmit is a very rare thing, right? So if you get one, it doesn't matter what it says. We can handle this. We can respond, right? I can help you respond. Reject, unfortunately, is the most likely, right? And sometimes you even get rejected within 24 hours. The editor just rejects it, right? So, you've got to steel yourself, right? So revise and resubmit is a great result. Normally going to have to do not just a second round review, a third round review, all of which takes time. Yeah, it takes time. They make a lot of, if you're doing a survey, Well, it's really hard to go out and change the questions with another 10,000 mail-outs, right? If you're doing an experiment, it's very hard to go and get participants to run it again if they make, crucial comments. And the same for qualitative. You have to go to all that trouble to get, new participants and ask them the revised questions. So if you get a revise and resubmit, then your odds of getting the paper published, go up astronomically, right? So what you've got to do is you've got to prepare a document. Yeah, it can be a very substantial document where you list every comment from the reviewers and the editor, and you have a response to every comment, right? So first of all, do not do this the day you get your review, right? Wait a few days and get some input, right? So you've got to be polite, right? Even though the referee is an idiot and doesn't understand how great you is, be polite and thank them for the comment, right? And you say, even if it's, you've said what they're complaining about is what you said, you say, oh, I apologize. I wasn't clear enough in what I said. And what I meant was, and then spell it out, right? So, so for each point, you're right. Whether you agree or disagree, and you don't have to agree with everything, but you give the reasons, and then you outline what you've changed and where you've changed it in the paper. But you shouldn't, do things. The referee might want you to do things which you don't believe in, right? So you should disagree and say, look, I disagree because of this. You want me to put this variable in, but it's non-stationary, and that would, foul up all the econometrics, and you give some simulations or something to show it. Yeah. So Renee Stolz was a long-term editor of the Journal of Financial Economics, and he's given some tips on responding to referees' comments. The very first thing he has is you've received your referee, received your referee report. The referee is an idiot. What do I do? And so that's the very first point, and he continues in that vein. It's quite humorous, right? Because everyone thinks the referee is an idiot, right? But by the time they finish answering, they go, oh, well, maybe I wasn't clear enough. I didn't really understand what I was doing. So it can be quite a substantial document. A colleague of mine, the one that predicts returns with 100,000 variables that he discarded and reported 5, he once did a response to the referee. He was trying to predict returns for the whole world, and it was a 100-page response. 100-page response on a 25-page paper. So the response can be quite a substantial document. You write down every point the referees have said and the editors, and you give a response and talk about where you changed it. But you should be able to, your chances of getting accepted are really go up if you're lucky enough to get a revised and resubmit. Remember, that's the big results you want. You're never going to get it accepted on the first round, but if you can get a revised and resubmit, that is fantastic. Doesn't matter what they say. So what are the lessons? You need to be thick-skinned because the language is truly awful, right? And the probability of rejection is high, but we all face it, right? We all face. I could wallpaper my house with the rejection letters I've received, right? Many times over. But it's because I've got so many rejections that I've got so many publications, right? You've got to try. And of course you're going to fail, right? But that's you trying. So the more you try, the more you fail, but also the more you succeed. So you need to be stubborn, right? You need to be persistent. You stick at it, right? Because, you get rejected, right? And it could take years, right? One paper I got published took me 8 years from when I started to when I got it accepted, right? And that's not all the journal's fault. The journals get back to you very quickly, but it can take a long while to do the revisions. Yeah. And you need to be organized, right? For example, if it's a capital market study, if a year or two has gone by, well, you're going to have to update the data. So you're going to have to remember where you got all the data from. You're going to have to redo the analysis. You're going to have to redo the writing. So unless you know where you got the data from and, have all that documented, you'd be starting from scratch again. So you've got to be organized for this. So if you're having trouble getting published, just rest assured that you're not the only one. All of these guys are Nobel Prize winners. And Gans and Shepard went out and talked to them. And they couldn't get away. These Nobel Prize men wanted to talk to them all day about the terrible time they had getting published, right? They have all these stories about the papers getting rejected, right? So they, the Gans and Shepard found it hard not to gain access to these Nobel Prize winners, but to get away from them because they wanted to talk and talk and talk about that. So they get lots of rejected papers. That's why they become Nobel Prize winners. They just kept working. So Black and Scholes sent their famous theoretical paper on, the theoretical value of a call option to Journal of Political Economy. And the editor, this is long before desk rejections become commonplace, the editor of Journal of Political Economy just sent it back. Yeah. And it was only after Black and Scholes got their empirical paper published, which showed that the option pricing model, correctly valued 99% of the options, that Farmer and Miller, two very famous professors at the University of Chicago, twisted the arm of the editor of the Journal of Political Economy to publish the paper. Sharpe, another Nobel Prize winner, came up with a capital asset pricing model, sent it to the Journal of Finance, but the editor sent it back and said that the assumptions that all investors had the same information is so preposterous that it makes all of the results meaningless. So he was just sitting down crushed by this, right? And it was only when there was a change in the editor, that the paper was ended up being published in the Journal of Finance. Lucas, the famous paper, Lucas the Nobel Prize winner, Neutrality of Money paper, sent it to one journal and said, if there's a point to the paper, it's hidden by the exposition, and they rejected it. And finally, after 2 or 3, he got accepted at a journal. Akerlof tried like 6 different journals, right? So essentially his paper is about how, it's very hard to have markets, right? Because, he gave an example of selling cars. So sellers know whether the car is good or not, but the buyers don't, right? So there's a difference in information. So, because the buyers don't know, they value, they're only prepared to pay the price of the bad cars, the lemons. And because they're only prepared to pay the price of the lemon, the people who are selling the good cars don't go to the market, right? And so then the only people selling would be the ones with lemons. So the market breaks down, right? So then you need something for markets to exist. And this is a very important point for markets. You need to have people like us who are liquidity traders. Every pay, 20% of my salary goes into my retirement, right? And that's whether the market's going up or going down, right? So all of the people putting their money away for their retirement stock exchange, they're the liquidity traders. And without us, they'd only be informed in the markets, and they don't want to trade with informed. So it's a very, very important paper, but it kept getting rejected. It was too general to be true. Well, actually, it's a fantastic model. It is, applies to everything. It was too trivial. It was too readable. And finally, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, which was a new journal back then, accepted it, but now it's got like 100,000 citations. And the Quarterly Journal of Economics must have made a few good calls, because now it's the highest impact factor of all economics journals, because it accepted a few papers like this. So we're still not finished. I think we can keep the recording on, because this topic is going to be related to coming up with research ideas and getting published. We're going to look at what the editor's looking for. Is that it? Oh, I did it. Okay. Is Zoom okay? This is just Word, so I'm just going to leave it like this. Yeah. Yeah. So this should be okay. Okay. So what are the editors looking for in general? We talked about what they're looking for qualitative, for surveys, experiments, and capital markets. But now we're going through, just everything about what they're looking for, right? For all of the different methodologies. So they're looking for original, citable research. Now, you've got to take into account what the editors need, right? The editors need the papers that they accept to be widely cited, right? So the more the papers they accept are cited, the higher the impact factor for the journal, and the more they get credit for doing a great job, right? So that's what they're worried about. So with that in mind, when you send a paper, you should have a lot of references, right? Particularly to the journal you're sending it to and their sister journals, right, in the same discipline, because that's very important for the editors. They look at that and go, this person knows what I'm looking for, right? So that's very important. You don't just send a paper which has got hardly any references, right? And the references have got to be current, this year or last year, yeah? So 2005, your references should be 2025 or 2024. So a bunch of recent references, because they're the ones that count the most towards their impact factor. So if you're going fishing, you need to know how fish behave, right? When's the best time? So if you're sending a paper to a journal, you've got to know what editors are looking for, right? And they're not going to tell you, they can't tell you, right? But they want citations recent to their own journal and their sister journals. And then they really like that, yeah? So on the margin, that's got to get you accepted. So, obviously, if the paper needs to make a contribution, right? But there's lots of ways you can make a contribution. So, it needs to make a contribution so you're cited. So it's important to have a great research question, a good research question. So you've got to be clear about what your research question is. And the methodology is going to be strong. And, you come up with the idea, you've collected your data, you've run your analysis, yeah, and you've written it up. Remember, you're only 10% there, right? So then you've got to really, really polish the paper, right? So this is really important. A lot of people just think, okay, I've written the paper, I'll send it off, but that doesn't work. Yeah, and here's the thing about the references, and they won't tell you that because they're not allowed to. So all of these different methodologies, what's the state of what the editor's looking for? Good example. So here's if you have this on soft copy, here's a Dropbox link to my national PhD course. And I'd love to see you doing that course, July 14th through 17th. It's online, it doesn't cost anything. So I think you'd learn a lot and you get a lot of resources, not just me talking, but there's all videos of past sessions and all of the reading and exercises, etc. So you've got to engage in the research conversation, and that's part of citing the literature. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. So, in my field and accounting, they do a lot of principal agent research. Yeah. So you can't just cite Jensen and Meckling in 1976 and then pretend you're the next paper, right, in the sequence, right? There's a whole lot of researchers that have worked in this area, and some quite recently. So you have to cite them, right? If you don't, you're not engaging in the research conversation. And there's a more practical point. Who do you think the editor's got to send your paper to? Are they going to send it to Jensen and Meckling? No, they're long gone from the academic scene. They're going to send it to the people that are working in principal agent right now. And if you haven't cited them, and they're going to think their work is incredibly important, and you haven't cited them, what chance do you think you have of getting published? No chance. No chance, right? So there's a practical, first of all, to be, true to academic standards, you should acknowledge the work of others. And second, there's a practical reason. They're the ones that are going to be refereeing your paper. So you better have referred to them and refer to them accurately. Okay. So for qualitative research, right? What are the editors looking for? So a couple of papers there by me and my co-authors. What's your theoretical perspective, right? Where do you fall on that? There's one absolute truth to everyone sees a different reality. And in fact, there are different realities, right? So, obviously, people see different things. Today, I've seen one reality, but I bet if we sat down and compared notes, it's completely different to what you've seen today, what you've experienced and what you've seen. What I've seen and what experienced is going to be completely different to you. And the person next to you is going to have a different experience. So you can't just ask a bunch of questions, right? Every interview question should be tied to your research question. Yeah. Don't necessarily have an hypothesis in qualitative, right? You're trying to get the rich background behind why people are doing things. And triangulation is really important. We saw how well that works, right? When you work in groups, you're incredibly focused, right? All the groups come up with the same three things for why people want to be teachers. When we did groups versus individual, the individuals weren't far off, but they had a huge variance, right? There was like a shotgun versus a sniper's bullet, right? So the groups were like a sniper's bullet, and whereas the individuals were like someone firing a shotgun, and it goes everywhere. So triangulation, right? It's not just data triangulation, it's not just interviews, documents, and observations. It's participant triangulation, right? If you do a study on financial disasters and you only talk to investors, you're only getting 1/3 of the story, right? Because the financial planners have a story to tell, and the regulators have a story to tell. You can't just paint them as the baddies, right? You need to talk to them because they have a story to tell, and you might be amazed, right, at what things look like from their perspective. So then when you've done the interview and you have the transcript, right, and you go through it and you're looking for themes, right? So you would come up with initial themes and then combine them to get intermediate and then final themes. But then you have another researcher would do the same, right? And then you compare. And soon you'll have AI doing it as well, right? So even if you're not another researcher, you can compare what you've done with what AI did. But that's important. But it's important then to go back and look at it again, right? So you can't just take an average. You've got to iterate until you get some sort of consensus. So it's a good idea to explicitly tie your conclusions, your final themes, to the sources. So was it the interview, the focus group? We haven't really talked about focus groups. They're difficult. They're more difficult than interviews. You should always videotape focus groups, right? And it's best to have a professional coordinator doing it. And you can be in a one-sided mirror, watching. But group dynamics are very interesting, right? A strong person can take the focus group completely off the rails, right? So that's why you wouldn't just do one focus group, you do a number of focus groups, and you'd have it videotaped so you could see the dynamics in the room. So focus groups are a little harder than interviews, so we haven't really talked about it. But then you've got your observations, your documents, bank tells you a very convincing story, but then you go and look at the documents relating to the bank, and you find it's been fined for, 45 million money laundering offences, right? And fined $1 billion, right? And it's not the only one. All the banks have been subject to ripping off the customs, right? There's a Royal Commission on it. And then you've got your memos. Yeah. So you tie it to one of those sources. And maybe the ones that's tied to most sources might be the strongest result. So, and Farah, Gephardt, they talk about the best practice on how to write up. Remember the Goldilocks rule. If you're giving quotes from the participant to back up your themes, you've got to be wary of giving too many quotes, right? In which case you'd have 100 pages, which is mainly quotes, or too little. You'd have 20 pages where there's barely a quote. So that the editor and the reader have sort of got to be brought along in the story with you, so they can almost guess what the final themes are. So for survey research, what are the editors looking for? Well, again, you've got to have a specific hypothesis, specific hypothesis. So definitely for survey, you have a hypothesis or hypotheses that you're testing. For qualitative, it could just be an exploratory study, right? And qualitative, along with the systematic lit review, might help you to come up with hypotheses to test in a survey. So then you've got to make sure the questions are tied to the hypothesis. So remember the 80-20 rule? You measure 4 times and cut once, because it's really expensive. You're sending it out to 10,000 people to get 1,000 respondents. So getting the questions right, don't you give it to your colleagues, right? Do they know what you mean? You know what you mean, but not everyone's going to know what you mean, right? So your colleagues, they go, yeah, that's good. So then do a pilot study of 30 to 50 people, and then just see whether, from the responses, whether they understand what you're doing. The use of scales is important, right? Do you just use the 5 for an individual question? Do you just have strongly agree to strongly disagree, or do you do 7? Do you include not applicable, because that's sometimes important. What about a abstract concept, right? Like confidence. Can you just ask how confident? I'm very confident to not very confident. In a 5-point scale, can you ask that? It doesn't work. You can ask it, but you're not going to get any credit for that, right? The scales, right, which are a series of questions that have been designed by other researchers, used many, many times, been verified scientifically, and they're available. And I showed you, where the website where you can find access to the library of scale. So abstract concepts, multiple questions, and which you aggregate to then find. So EQ, IQ, financial literacy, risk aversion, climate worry, climate stress, all these sorts of things. And the response bias, right? So, if Vietnam Academy sends to their own people, only 30% are going to respond, right? That's what you should expect. To get more than that, that's fantastic. Vietnam Academy sends it out to the general population, they're probably only going to get 10%. Right? But they think they're going to get more. Only in Russia will you get 100%. 100% of the people vote for Putin. So only in Russia will you get 100%, but you won't here. So then common method variance. Is the way that you're doing the survey affecting the result, right? And we talked about online. I'm your biggest, champion. You asked me to do the survey for you, I'm going to do it. But if it's online, I'm just going to look down the answers till I find the first one that seems relevant, and I'm going to go click on that one, right? If you're on the telephone with me, I'm going to probably give you one of the last ones, right? I'm going to get sick of saying, what were the first 3 again? And you're going to get sick of it. So the only ones I'm going to remember are the second last and the last. And I'm going to go with one of those, right? So the way you ask the questions, so you should mix up the order of the questions, and you should mix up the order of the responses, because this is a known common method variance, right? So that's very important. Don't collect your independent variables and your output variables from the same survey. Collect them from different sources. So that's really important. These are all things you do ex ante. just as a practical common sense, don't ask people for their characteristics at the beginning of the survey, because once you ask them their age or their weight, they might just say, no, I'm not doing this. So have those things towards the end, right? Right at the end. Otherwise, that way you capture the responses to the questions related to your hypothesis. And then these are all ex ante measures to do. And then ex post, you can test to see whether there's any common method variance in the results, right? And then we pointed you to a YouTube video that went through that. Yep, and then there's these good papers here for primers and surveys. Don Leclerc for asking questions, and member and common method variance, and remember the lady from Yale that wrote about doing experiments in economics, and I think she published that in very recently, 2023. So well worth looking at. Literature reviews, I've been told not to say anything about literature reviews because we've had a real expert take you through that, and you're doing a little bit more on it tomorrow. Yeah. What are the editors looking for with experiments? Again, you've got to have a clear hypothesis. What's your exogenous shock? What's your outcome? Yeah. So you've got to have treatment and control. What about using students as subjects? Well, students are very homogeneous across the world. So, and they can understand complicated instructions and abstract claims. So, that's, applicable to the real world. Are you playing with very small stakes? Well, we saw that, they did a survey in Australia, where they were getting $50, but at that time, the Australian dollar was so strong that when they were doing the same thing in Indonesia, that $50 was equal to a month's pay, and it didn't affect the outcomes. So anchoring, right, is incredibly important, and order effects, right? And, anchoring is sort of going with the default, and we talked about that can affect your entire retirement income. The American people go with the default. They're anchored at the government bond portfolio, earn 2 to 4%. The Australian default is the full market, and they get 8 to 10%. So makes a big difference, and everyone seems to go with the default. And the order effects, we know that's very important. If you had 3 hours sleep, then 10, you might get different outcomes than if you had 10 hours sleep and then 3. And so then for the capital market studies, do not do 2-stage least squares. It's no different to GMM, but it's the editors don't want to see it, right? They want to see you doing GMM, right? So that's what they want to see. You'll end up, in most cases, with the same coefficients as 2-stage least squares. It's just that you do it all in one step. So you can call, IV GMM, just call it that. They do want to, causality is a big issue. So they want the natural experiment using diff and diff. That's referred to as reduced form. So once you've shown the causation with the natural experiment, then they want you to fit a structural model. That is a theoretical model, right? Where you can ask what if questions. What if these parameters change? What effect would that have on the output? And sample selection for our response bias, that was important, right? We said you could do a Heckman's sample correction, and we gave you a video. Same thing here. In capital market studies, you can do sample selection as well. Again, using Heckman, Nobel Prize winner, his sample selection, sample bias, sample selection bias correction. And, use robust standard errors. Just don't go with the maximum likelihood standard errors. Go with robust standard errors, which normally means GMM standard errors, right? So they're adjusted for heteroscedasticity and autocorrelation. I did very well to say that big word, the heteroscedasticity one, at this time of the afternoon. So we're nearly finished. We're going to need some questions because we've got to wait for Duke to come back, and because she has the books and she wants to take photos of me presenting each of you with the book. So I'm sure she'll be here very soon.
I'm
Can
on the taxi.
She's here. She's right here. She's in the taxi.
I'm on the taxi. I will be back soon. Right.
She's been monitoring us.
So you just, you just get everyone to register if they want to register. Yeah.
Something about registering. I'm not sure what she said, but if you want to register, you can register. Please ask a question.
Yeah, I will be back soon in 10 minutes.
10
Yeah.
minutes, she says. Yeah. So we need more questions. This is good.
Yeah, maybe just do Q&A for 10 minutes, Tom,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. I'm going to mute Duke now.
If
You're
anyone,
interfering with our questions. Okay, let's have the question.
Experiment online.
Mm.
Try to know more about the condition, pro and con. Is it suitable to use the experiment data for my thesis or not? So if you can elaborate more about in one case.
Oh, it's suitable for most things, right? And it's the best way to show causation. And, you look at all the published, papers on experiments in the FT50 papers, journals, they're, on all sorts of topics. So what's your topic area?
In retail, digital retail environment.
So digital retail environment.
Topics, green, the green digital nugget, nugget.
Digital, someone help me?
I previously that you use some of the small like UX, UI, to change a little bit on the design on the internet.
Yeah, so that could be the intervention, right? So what sort of digital, specification they have in front of them, and does that affect, for example, their buying behavior? Yeah. So you could easily design an experiment around that, and you'd find lots of examples where they have different conditions. That it would be, especially in the marketing and psychology areas, right? So, and I've got to tell you, the marketing people know so much about behavioral biases, right? They can push the buttons to get you to buy things that you never even knew existed and never wanted, right? So, but they're amazing, like particularly in getting men, middle-aged men to buy, really dodgy financial products, right? So they're just amazing. They show a person in a beautiful suit on a mountaintop and all the things that a middle-aged man wants to be, and they're driving this car, or they're wearing the suit, or they're using this financial trading system, right? So the marketers know more about behavioral biases than anyone, right? Because they've been doing it for years. They've been getting people to buy stuff they didn't need for like decades. So you'll find lots and lots of experimental designs in marketing and psychology that will be very useful for you. But yours will be different because it's new and better, and it's looking at digital interventions and different, not just digital versus analog, but different ways to do the digital intervention. So that will be your exogenous shock. I think that would be ideal for an experiment. And the reason an experiment is you can really see the effect of the intervention. If you just looked at an empirical study where you collect the data, there's so many compounding effects, you might not be able to establish causality. Yeah. So what's better than a natural experiment? Well, an actual experiment, yeah. Yeah, more time. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. I love making a fool of myself. That means I'm trying. When you wake up of a morning, some people go, oh, I hope I have the perfect day. I hope I don't stub my toe on the way out. I think to myself, if I only make 99 mistakes today, I'm going to be really happy, right? So if I get through the end of the day and I've only made 95 big mistakes, I go, wow, what a great day. Right? And as a result of that, I'm a very happy person. But the person who wants, a lot of people want to have the perfect day, and they're always unhappy because there's no such thing, right? You always got to stub your toe or make a fool of yourself, right? So and that's a very important thing, behavioral. It's like framing, isn't it? I frame it a certain way, right? And it really works for me. So don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself, is what I'm trying to say. You're not going to make a fool of yourself, because the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. That was a really good day, but gee, I wish I'd asked this question. That relates to my own research. Yeah. And I'm not going to say that your question sucks, you suck, your university sucks, and your family sucks. I'm going to leave that for the referee to say, because they will do it better than me. I could do all of this interpretive dance, if you like. So I could do a 60-second interpretive dance, which will bring home what the editor's looking for.
Okay, because we will have some another program at the end of this afternoon session. On behalf of the organizing committee, I just want to say that thank you to Professor Miss for today's session on the qualitative and also the quantitative method for all of us here. And also, I would like to invite the representative from our Aviation Academy store. Just have the flowers and token of appreciation to you. Today, I just want to invite Mr. Adam from International Institute and also Mr. Wang, Deputy Dean of the Department of Aviation and Operation. Yeah.
I'm taking this seriously. I'm taking this very seriously.
Yeah. So we want to send our sincere gratitude to you, to thank you for you delivered the experience, the sharing experience for us. Okay.
That's all right. Leakage okay. That's all right.
Yeah. Okay.
We can fix it. We can put it in one of these cups. So. Thank you.
Can I applause for?
No, it's gone. So thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
Okay.
Let's put Canary on the back.
Sorry, but we have one more from the Faculty of Foreign Language. We have some flowers to give to Professor Smith and also Professor Charlie. Could you please on the stage, also? Yeah, I think that we have fruitful and insightful for 2 days and one more for you tomorrow. Okay, this from Faculty of Foreign Language. Yeah, okay.
Ồ, mấy cái đèn vỡ. Bạn có đồ vào đấy. Để di chuyển ra cho mình kiểu cái xoay. Cái này đúng rồi.
Yeah, okay, maybe we can have a group photo, big group photo of our own class. Yeah, whole class. Okay. We see familiar face from yesterday and today's session.
And isn't that great to solve all of it and problems for the temporary that are solved.
Đứng hai năm rồi. Okay.
Đâu mà để tiền dùng đứng sau này. Yeah.
We're not doing more of a curve. A high curve. their books. We should be arriving anytime soon, the door will open. How's she carrying all those books? So they weigh a lot. 30 books would weigh a lot. Okay, don't go because you're going to get your fine books. Who's got a hold on to this one? He, you know, my man, you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we're not done yet.
We're done today and sent some people.
So we need to have Kiberi here in the background. So how do we do that? Kiberi or Vietnam Academy, we need to have that as a background here.
Thank you.
So remember, we've still got quite a few people online. So do the online people have any questions?
Could we have your work file about what the editors record?
Yeah, so you have here, you have the Dropbox for the whole national PhD course. Let me find that for you. Let me find that for you. So you have this on soft copy. You have this on, they sent it to you on soft copy. Yep, yep. Okay, so here we go. Yep. Yep, it's good, it's good. So if you click on,
Send us the file,
it's a
screen.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you've got all that soft copy. Oh, okay. Didn't have that one? That wasn't part of the thing?
So in this book,
Oh, okay. Let me think. Here it is. Right here, starts on page 338. What I just went through. Yeah, page 338. So you've got that, and you should have a link to the whole national PhD course as well. Let me just find out where that is.
Hi Tom. Hi Tom.
Hey, yeah,
Do you hear me?
yep.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Am I
So,
Không tới để đâu.
Duke,
Yes,
can you help? Someone's asking a question on Zoom.
sure. Còn có mấy cuốn các bạn nhé. Thầy sẽ ký và thầy sẽ tặng chụp hình. Sách có bản quyền 1 triệu một cuốn. Còn có mấy cuốn.
I'll put the link here.
Đi lấy mà.
Anyway, I'll send you the link. Might be good for you to do that course in July 14th to 17th. Yeah.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, this I signed for someone earlier.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
No
so
one
keep that separate.
I have a question for Tom.
So you.
What question?
Em chị Đức
please
ơi,
contact
em
to
có một câu hỏi về research method thì
National PhD Research Methodology course on from July from 14th to 17th. So it might be good for you to do it. And there you'll get the Dropbox with all videos and readings and a lot more material.
You mean the one in Korea?
Yeah,
Yeah. She should have.
yeah.
She in the group already, so.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but yeah, so you should send a link to that.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Dropbox, hả?
Yeah, it's a Dropbox link.
Oh, you want the
I'll
Dropbox?
send it to you.
This one is exactly from the Dropbox.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, but there's more stuff. There's more videos and readings.
The video is only YouTube.
No, in my Dropbox.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for the course, there's all videos of me doing. it.
Okay, yeah, I send later.
You'll
Yeah.
send it. I'll send it to you, you pass it
Yeah,
on.
right. Thank you.
So what was the question? Someone's asked me a question?
No one. I think.
I'm here. Dạ em Mai
Yes.
đây chị. Em hỏi nha.
Em hỏi đi.
Thông,
Ở
I have
camera
a
nó
question.
không biết mặt mũi.
Dạ, em Ngọc Mai đây.
Ừ.
My question is that if I do both survey and interview in my research and the
So,
results of
okay, you're asking about interviews?
do you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay, I will repeat my question.
Yep.
If I do both research and interview in my research, and the results from the survey and the interview is the contrast. So, what is your advice in that
So, yeah,
situation?
so here's my best advice, right? You first do the literature review and you get, what the experts think is going on. Then you do the interviews, the qualitative, and you see what real people are worried about. And then in designing the survey and coming up with your hypotheses and questions, you take what ask questions about what the literature has said, but also questions about what the qualitative has said. And so remember your interview is only with 30, 50 or 70 people, but your survey is with 1,000, right? So you might get results that are different from what the literature thought or your qualitative says, but that makes it even more interesting. If the results aren't consistent with what you found in the literature review or the interviews, then you've got some new findings, right? So then you might iterate back to doing another qualitative study and then another survey. So rather than being a problem that you get inconsistent results from the survey to the interviews, it actually makes it more interesting.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, you.
See
Thank
you
you, V.
tomorrow.
Thank you, V.
Mai.
All right.
Yes. See you tomorrow, Mai.
Yeah, see
Thank
you.
you, Mai. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye bye, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Are we stopping the recording?
Yes, you can now. Right.